Hello everybody and welcome back to another edition of KerVAM. Of course, if you're somehow new here, it is a Doctor Who podcast where we focus and discuss a lot about Doctor Who, DVDs, Blu-rays, all the physical media of Doctor Who. And certainly we're going to be doing a bit of that today as we're discussing a story and its special features that is very much connected to the new episode of Doctor Who coming up on Easter Sunday in Legend of the Sea Devils, because today we're tackling The Sea Devils, the original from 1972. I couldn't quite believe it was 50 years ago when I read it as well, which just is crazy to me. But yes, as always, I'm joined by my three trusty guests. Ryan, how are you getting on today?
I'm doing very well, Elliot. I'm really excited to talk about actually a good Sea Devil story for once. So
yes, we're saving the worst to last, aren't we, with Warriors next week. We'll focus on the good one.
Oh boy, that's going to be, yeah. Well, again, full thoughts next week, but yeah, at least we have the good one first. At least we're starting off on a positive note.
Let's focus on the positives for now. Charlie, are you excited to discuss the Sea Devils?
I am, yes. I did see it a couple of weeks ago, so I've not got the sharpest memory of it, but yeah, I've seen the special features, and I do have some words to say about the trailer for Legend of the Sea Devils that was released yesterday.
Indeed, yeah. Bill, did you like the look of the Legend of the Sea Devils trailer?
Yeah, I did. It looks really, really good. I think it's going to be a really fun episode.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk more about it at the end, but I think it's going to be one to certainly look forward to as we record it 2 weeks today, but it's probably less than that by the time you listen to this. So before we get into the podcast proper, I just wanted to bring a little news update about the Season 22 Blu-ray, because of course, when we chatted about it, did our big, when they announced it and did our big podcast about it, I think it was about 2 months ago now. The rumoured release date was going to be the middle of March, the 14th of March, I think was the original date. Of course, we're past that and it hasn't happened. They had the BFI event, which generally happens, maybe 1 or 2 weeks before the release, which was on the 6th of March, where they showed Revelation of the Daleks and some of the sort of clips of the special features as well to give a little hint of it. So it was clearly, basically finished and ready to go. But it's not come out. It's not had any news about it. It wasn't in Doctor Who magazine for this month, which suggests it's at least another 4 weeks before we're going to get it. So I've been doing the scouring of the forums to try and find out what's going on. And although there's no clear defined answer, it seems to be that it's a delay in the packaging, because the packaging is done somewhere abroad. I honestly can't remember where. It's somewhere in Eastern Europe. I think quite near Ukraine, which is probably why I don't think it's hard to work out why. Therefore, things might be a little bit delayed at the moment. So unfortunately it's delayed. It's not because the BBC have suddenly decided to stop making them, or because the content can't be made, or whatever. It's nothing to do with that. It's literally just a packaging issue because of more important world events going on right now. But I have seen the original website that basically gave the rumoured date of the 14th of March has now given an updated date of the 20th of June. So I'm putting my money on that being roughly when we like to expect it. Obviously that's still quite a way away because it's 2.5 months from now, which is a bit of a shame. I was looking forward to getting stuck into at least the special features of season 22. But it's good to know that at least it should still be on the way. Chris Chapman was on the forums the other day saying there's lots of things to look forward to and still lots of excitement to come. So as far as it seems to be the case, it looks like they're still cracking on with production on new documentaries for future releases and all of that. It's simply just the packaging can't come through, so they can't currently release them. But I do feel like we're suddenly going to end up with a bit of a backlog, and then we'll end up with season 22 in June. I wouldn't be surprised if we got 2 more by the end of the year as well, if we're really lucky. But yeah, we'll have to see how the rest of the year goes. But I just wanted to give it an update because we haven't mentioned it for a couple of months now, and I thought people might be wondering what the heck's happened to it because just no one's talking about it. But that's essentially the reason why. So yeah, after that little update, let's get cracking on with the Sea Devils. Now, obviously, Legend of the Sea Devils is coming up in 2 weeks' time on Easter Sunday, so it felt no better time than to look back on both of the Sea Devil stories of Classic Who. As we mentioned, Ryan, the Sea Devils, the better one, and Warriors of the Deep, the more debatable one, but that's for next week. So we're not going to talk about that. We're going to leave it for next week and deal with that difficult issue in a week's time. So who wants to kick us off with some thoughts on the Sea Devils?
Well, with the Sea Devils, I think it's easily one of the best John Pertwee stories, easily. Yeah. I like the fact that it's set on Earth, but it doesn't rely on Unit. You may think with everything going on that Unit might be involved, but yeah, it doesn't. It features the Navy, which is definitely something unexpected. I think it's definitely something makes it a bit more realistic in that sense that they're actually relying on real world forces to help combat what is clearly and sort of a creature threat, and the fact that it does work really well as a sort of semi-sequel to the Silurians, the fact that it's reusing a lot of the same sort of ideas of the Silurians, and it's instead of it being in the tunnels and on land, it's now take place in the sea, which is definitely much more, again, makes it feel more different while still keeping in with the ideas of the previous story. And the fact you throw in Roger Delgado's master into the mix, which is always a welcome treat. He is still my favorite master today. Roger Delgado always elevates scenes whenever he's on screen, especially more so when he's with John Pertwee. And so it's just a really damn good story with some memorable scenes, whether it's the sea devils emerging from the waters or that infamous fight between the Third Doctor and the Master. And it still sticks to this very day. The fact more so that when a little bit of a side story, went to the Doctor Who proms in 2013, I remember that when they did sort of the musical montage of classic Doctor Who, when it got to the Third Doctor's here, they played a bit of music from the Sea Devils and created the most when he's going through the minefield and the Sea Devils emerging from the water. It just goes to show what an iconic story this is after.
Well, it's behind me if you're watching the YouTube version as well, the Sea Devils coming out of the water.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just an amazing story. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I certainly have very, positive opinions on it generally. I think it's a fantastic story. But Charlie, what are some of your highlights or favorite moments from this story?
I feel definitely that one sword fight between the Doctor and the Master when they're in the prison. I feel it's just a really iconic scene, and it's really just showing how Pertwee and Delgado's off-screen chemistry sort of shines through into the actual thing. Like, you can tell that although they're enemies, they're actually just having a really fun time, and it's just enjoyable to watch because of that. And obviously Pertwee gets some iconic moments while he just picks up the sandwich while they're having sword fights and eats it. It's just a really fun and iconic scene, probably my favorite of the episode. Obviously as well, the Sea Devils emerging, the Doctor running through the minefield, like you said before, and obviously the whole final episode, the battle on the naval base was just iconic in itself. I feel although I do feel the more memorable moments of this don't feature Sea Devils. I feel the best moments with the characters. Not that I don't like the Sea Devils, but they're just sort of a thing to make the characters do things. It's that's more what it is, I feel.
Yeah, I certainly noticed this, which is, I don't think it's a negative thing. It's just kind of something I observed on this viewing of it, was compared to the Silurians, which is sort of, a good episode to compare it to. There's similar ideas behind both of them. It feels with the Silurians that there's a lot, almost the Silurians themselves have a lot more character. There's there's these sort of inner conflict between the Silurians with the sort of older one who's more, we want to try and negotiate the peace, and then the young one who just like, I want to kill everybody, and ultimately kills the older one. And that's sort of those dynamics there. Whereas it feels like in the Sea Devils, firstly, the Sea Devils aren't really in it very much for the first 3 episodes. Like, they're kind of the threat, but the Master's kind of the sort of face of it almost, and actually the one getting involved in all of it rather than the Sea Devils, until they come in later in the story, and we only actually ever hear one. I think the Sea Devil leader is the only Sea Devil who ever has any dialogue on screen as well. So there isn't any sort of internal conflict between the Sea Devils in any way, which doesn't make them necessarily any worse. But I think it's just because you've got the sort of Master as almost the main villain who's using the Sea Devils essentially. It means that he gets much more of the focus than the Sea Devils, which I think is fair enough. But I think it's just notable that they're slightly less of a feature of the whole story compared to, say, the Silurians in Doctor and the Silurians. But Bill, what are your sort of general thoughts on the Sea Devils?
Yeah, again, like everybody else, I really enjoy it. I think it is a really good John Pertwee story, but it's one that, again, as like Ryan was saying, it's kind of an Earthbound story, but without having the unit family. And I notice actually with that particular season 9, they kind of start to slowly get away from the Earthbound unit stuff a lot. I think probably because they were kind of running a little bit out of ideas in some ways with that.
Yeah, probably.
because they used it that much for the previous 2 seasons. So, but yeah, I think it does make for, like, obviously the dynamic you have with the unit family normally with the brigadier and everything cannot ever be beaten, really. But I think the Royal Navy stuff is still really good, and Captain Hart is still like a really good character. And yeah, and his interactions with the Doctor and everything, again, not as good as perhaps the Brigadiers, but it's still some really good scenes between them. I think it is mostly, I think the story is mostly about, even though yes, there are Sea Devils in it, it's their first story. As you were kind of saying, they're not really in it that much. So I think it's more about what the Doctor and the Master are doing, essentially, and their rivalry between each other and everything, which is fine. I mean, that's completely fine, and I really enjoy John Pertwee and Roger Delgado on screen together, because no disrespect to any Doctor or Master that's come since, but I think they are the best Doctor Master pairing, because they just work so well together, and you kind of get the impression of, well, it's you get the impression that they used to be friends, and there's still, even though now they're on opposite sides, there's still that kind of mutual respect and like caring for each other in a way, because like at the beginning of the story, I think Joe says something to the Doctor about how, oh, you're just kind of it's something about how much the Doctor kind of cares for the Master and wants to make sure that he's being looked after and everything. And I think that's kind of nice. It's not just your standard hero and villain dynamic. It's there's something underneath that which is really interesting. The Sea Devils themselves are really good, but as you say, that even though it's their first story, they're perhaps not as used perhaps as much as they could have been. But I think that's not necessarily a negative thing for the story, because I think it still works really well as it is. And I think in some ways, it's not to say Doctor Who and the Silurians is a bad story, but I think in some ways this kind of does what the Silurians was doing a bit better, in that it's an episode less for a start in terms of duration, so that helps it. And also it's kind of, with Doctor and the Silurians, there's a lot of talking and everything between characters, and that's good, don't get me wrong, but with the Sea Devils, it's really action-packed with so much stuff going on. And I think that kind of makes it more of an engaging story to watch, really, in some ways. But they're both really good stories. And I think the Sea Devils, I'm kind of glad that it does retread some of the same ground as the Silurians, but not so much that it feels like really repetitive and boring. And if it still brings something new to the table.
Yeah, I think that, the Master is really kind of that added dynamic to it. Obviously, you have a completely different sort of feel and aesthetic to the story by having it set at sea, and having the Navy as the sort of replacement for unit. As you said, Captain Hart is the sort of surrogate brigadier in this story and sort of taking on that role. And you say does a pretty good job of it. But I think just adding in the Master, who essentially his plan is like, I want to bring the Sea Devils out to get them to kill all the humans just to spite you, Doctor, is basically his plan. Like classic Master stuff. But it just adds a slightly different dynamic to what we see in the Silurians, where it's much more about trying to negotiate the peace. And that sort of extends over a long period of time. Whereas, the Doctor kind of tries it for 3 minutes until obviously, the stupid humans decide to launch some missiles into the underwater, and it all rather goes wrong there, which is quite interesting. But yeah, Charlie, what do you think about the sort of comparisons between the Silurians and the Sea Devils and with this story?
Yeah, so for a long time, I did prefer Doctor Who and the Silurians to the Sea Devils, mostly because I'm very nostalgic for season 7, because it's the first time I really got into classic Doctor Who, and I remember waiting after finishing Spearhead from Space. I immediately ordered the story, and I watched it in like 2 sittings and loved it, and it was brilliant. And I still do think it's a really good story. It's probably my least favorite in season 7, but it has like some of the steepest competition, so
just a bit.
So it's probably the weakest of season 7, and I probably do prefer the Sea Devils a bit, because as you were saying, Bill, it kind of just has a bit more extra over, Doctor Who and the Silurians because of the added dynamic with the Master, which is probably why, I do feel it succeeds because of the Master. Like, it wouldn't be as good without him. And I feel he's there to add a level of like complexity and an intricate villain compared to the Sea Devils, who, while they're great, they're basically just there to be shot down and to provide some action. They're not, it's not really as philosophical and deep and moralistic as Doctor Who and the Silurians, which definitely. I feel that's a strength of Doctor Who and the Silurians that this story doesn't have. But I do feel this is better purely because of the Master and his dynamic with the Doctor. And I feel, no disrespect to Liz Shaw, but I do feel Jo is a much better and more developed companion here as well. So
yeah. Although I did feel like watching it that Jo didn't have huge amounts to do. I felt she was often kind of put off to the side. I know, obviously, the joke about making the sandwiches and stuff, which gets taken off her and things. But I just felt like it's a while since I've watched any other Pertwee stories, but she felt slightly sidelined as a character in this story. Not like she wasn't involved, but just a little bit. But Ryan, what do you think about the sort of Doctor Master stuff early in the story? We kind of see it for a rare occasion in classic Who, a good bit of continuity where we see the Master in prison after being arrested at the end of season 8. We've had a couple of, I think, Day of the Daleks and Curse of Peladon, and then we get into this, the Sea Devils. So is it nice to kind of continue that storyline on in a sort of natural way from the end of season 8?
Definitely, and I like the fact that this was the first time that the Master's more used as a recurring villain rather than being the principal main villain, as he was throughout season 8. And I think they mentioned in one of the documentaries, I think it was for this story or for one about the Master in another season collection, that they realized once they realized that by having the Master in every single story of season 8, it does run the risk of becoming a bit repetitive. Even though I personally loved season 8 and it's probably still my favorite Pertwee season, I can understand to an extent where they're coming from, because yes, it's always cool that the Master's behind all this, but once you do that for every single story, it does start to become very repetitive. So I like the fact that they decided to make him more of a recurring villain as he still is to this very day. And I like the fact that it's sort of continuing on. It shows where he's been since the events of the Demons, that he's in prison, but shock of all shocks, he's in control of it, basically, because he's got the governor and the guards on his side, and he's able to come and go whenever he pleases. And I like, as Bill was saying, and Bill Charles said, it is nice that you have sort of this, as I said, that whenever they're together, the Doctor and the Master, it just elevates things, and it does show that the Doctor, even though they're on opposite sides now, and the Doctor is saying he must stay there forever, it shows that he does still care about him, that he's still deep down his best friend. I think this was the first time they explicitly say that the Master was once the Doctor's friend. I don't think it was mentioned at all in season 8. I think this is the first time they mentioned it, again, adding a bit more history, which I always appreciate the fact that the Doctor always gives a little bit of his backstory, but it's just very brief and it's glossed over, and it does add a little bit, but it never delve into it too much, and they're able to continue, which was again one of many reasons why I'm not a huge fan of the Timeless Child. But again, that's it, all different kind of worms. But anyway, back to the Master. It just adds a lot more layers to it, and this sort of dive deeper into sort of the Doctor Master sort of friendship / enemy rivalry. It is definitely the best that's ever been. I don't think it's quite the only Doctor Master pair that does come close for me is probably Peter Capaldi and Michelle Gomez.
Yeah,
I think that was for me the only time I ever feel like it comes close to capturing that sort of the magic that John Pertwee and Roger Delgado had. I mean, but then again, Stephen Moffat completely redefined the Master with Michelle Gomez's incarnation by having her start as the typical villain before becoming more and more of an anti-hero as the journey goes on, which I still think is one of the best story arcs ever, showing her progression and her encounter with John Sims' master and everything that was going on. So, and I just like the fact that this has sort of helped lays the groundwork for that a little bit by establishing that. And obviously, Roger Delgado is, well, he is still the king. He's always lights things up whenever he's on screen. And you can tell he genuinely is having a lot of fun playing the master. And the fact that, as mentioned before, the chemistry between John Pertwee and Roger just shines all the way through. And I will never forget that fight. It's still an absolute high point. And John Pertwee even has time to sort of make jokes throughout, just adds another layer to it. And for me, some of the master stuff in this story is definitely some of the top tier master storytelling there's definitely been to date. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that fight at the end of, episode 2 between the Doctor and the Master it works because it's so well choreographed, it's so well scripted and then performed and edited so that it really, it really sells it. It feels convincing, I think, which so often those sort of scenes can just look a bit, like they are staged, whereas I feel like you really believe in this scene. And then obviously ending the episode on the cliffhanger, the Master throwing a knife seemingly at the Doctor as well. Obviously, we know he's not going to do it, but it's not actually going to hit him. But it's still just a cool moment to end that story on that episode of the story on, I think, which is a really great moment. And as you say, Ryan, I definitely agree that Delgado and Pertwee are not going to be beaten anytime soon. The Master, Missy's come close with her very different interpretation of it, but outside of that, you've got Madman John Sim, a sort of Antonioni, the kind of poor man's Roger Delgado, and we don't talk about Eric Roberts. John
Sim, I think he definitely got better. I think John Sim was definitely at his best when he was in that last story with Capaldi. I think that was at his best. And honestly, I wished he was like that from the get-go, because my problem with him throughout Tennant's Run was that he was just way too... It felt like an odd mesh of him trying to be serious and threatening, but yet at the same time, next minute he's just manic and goofy. Yeah. It just never feels like never quite know what to do with his master. Whereas I feel like in the last story with Capaldi, they make him more of a ruthless, just manipulative, an absolute bastard on every single level, and I absolutely love it, because I feel like that is the master that John Sim should have been playing from the get-go, that sort of nasty, manipulative master that's always messing with everyone. And I feel like that is kind of how I feel like the master should be at times. And no disrespect to Sacha Dhawan, he's done a great job. Yeah. But I just felt like there have been times, more so in The Timeless Children, where he just sort of plays it a little bit too silly, especially during the bit after he gets rid of the lone Cyberman. He just goes a little bit crazy in that moment. And I just hope, we all know that he's probably going to come back in Jodie Whittaker's final story. Yeah. I really hope he just delivers a consistently just sort of downright nasty performance in her last story. I'm just hoping he delivers big time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what, you never know, he might turn up at the cliffhanger at the end of Legend of the Sea Devils if we're lucky. If there is a cliffhanger, we can but hope. It'd be quite fun. Bill, just having a bit more just chat about the Sea Devils. I thought one of the things I really noticed watching it is, firstly, the amount of location footage featured in this. Obviously, we introduced the Navy. There's so many shots on boats and out at sea. And I feel like the transition between sort of studio and location footage also works really effectively. Do you feel like the sort of location aspect of this really enhanced the story for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact that a lot of it is set at sea or under water later on with the Sea Devils base and everything, I think that works really well, because it makes it more of a unique story in many ways, because not to like say anything bad about John Pertwee era, but a lot of his early stories were kind of the same old Earthbound unit story, and this is still an Earthbound story, but it's got more of a unique feel to it because of the fact that so much of it is set at sea, and I don't know, it kind of, in a way, it almost feels kind of slightly claustrophobic in a way. Like, it's the most of the action really is set on this tiny little island, and so it's not it's kind of in some ways, I wouldn't say necessarily better, but it's different anyway to what we'd normally get when a lot of the Earthbound stories are set on the mainland and everything. Whereas this one, because so much of it is set at sea, it gives it a unique feel to it, which I really enjoy. I think that, yeah, it's just really good. I mean, I think I did once have this book, which I think was done at the time of filming of the Sea Devils, called The Making of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And it showed like some black and white pictures of them out filming for Sea Devils and everything. And they were actually on water and everything. And it just, it kind of, it feels, I suppose in some ways it feels more grounded because it's kind of, it's at sea. It's not just in a studio space. I mean, yes, there's still studio spaces in this story, but there is something very unique about this story because so much of it is set at sea, which I really enjoy.
I was just going to say, I feel that's another thing that gives it a bit of an edge over Doctor Who and the Silurians. Like, that was just a very generic underground base sort of thing. Like, if you just take like a shot of John Pertwee in an underground base from Doctor Who and the Silurians, you probably couldn't immediately identify it because it's so similar to, I don't know, Ambassadors of Death or Inferno or Colony in Space, maybe, or lots of the early stories, whereas this, I feel, gives it a more unique feel, like you were saying, Bill, compared to Doctor Who and the Silurians, which, it gives it more of an interesting feel because it's very recognizable and memorable compared to that story, I feel. And I feel that's going to be the same for Legend of the Sea Devils as well.
Yeah, I think certainly having, we've all seen the trailer, I think it's definitely got a very vivid look to it, if nothing else. So I think it's very much a story that you're going to, recognize and remember, no matter how good or bad it is. It's certainly going to be quite iconic in that sense. But I think that'll bring our discussions to a close on the Sea Devils, the story. But of course, as we're a podcast that talks about, the DVDs and the Blu-rays, the documentaries, we couldn't let it pass but to talk about the special features also included on the Sea Devils DVD release. Obviously, the Sea Devils has not yet been released as part of the collection range, so it hasn't got its upgrade yet. But back in 2008, I think it was 2007, 2008, they released a box set with the Silurians, the Sea Devils, and Warriors of the Deep, sort of all of the Silurian/Sea Devil stories in one, called Beneath the Surface. The Sea Devils got its own, I think it only got a one-disc release in the end, but it got a few different special features on there. I think the main kind of big feature was the making of documentary, which Charlie and Ryan are going to tell me more about in a minute because I have not had the time to watch it. But so sorry for my failings there, guys. But it's all good. And a few other little bits and bobs. But Ryan, what was the documentary about this story like?
I think it was just basically a sort of more like a half an hour sort of discussion about making of the story in general, talking about how they got the Navy involved and sort of some of the complications in that. Because looking at my notes here and recapping it, say that they had to do they were arranged to do some training exercises at a different location, but they were able to rearrange it to a different location so that it could help film this story, and even offered the production crew to sort of take part in it. And the whole complications were trying to get approval from the Ministry of Defence and all the different various issues with that. And so they had to fabricate sort of a letter to try and make sure they all went smoothly. And it just goes to and show that they did try to make it go to many different legs to try and make sure it's as grounded and realistic as possible, and trying to get the real Navy involved. And Michael E. Bryant, who of course directed Colony in Space in the previous season, he comes back to direct this one, and is maybe his best one to. I think it might be his best Doctor Who directed story. Definitely, with some of the amazing shots that he was able to pull off, and some interesting tidbits about the fact that originally they were going to have the Sea Devils without any clothing, similar to the Silurians. The fact they were just going to be nothing. But Michael, I think that it was the director that said that he didn't want that because he didn't want to well, show any nudity on Doctor Who, even with aliens. And
Yes,
so,
indeed.
so they had to come with something different. And so they just found some blue-green netting, just cut some holes into it, and put it on them, and that was basically it.
And that became iconic, obviously, didn't it?
Yeah, and they went on to have many different costumes since then of varying quality. With and now, of course, it's samurai armor in the Jodie Whittaker story.
Exactly.
It's definitely an interesting look and definitely striking. And so, yeah, it just goes in depth about all these different going to the different locations, and of course, interesting for one scene they were climbing. I think it was like when they were going to that island, and they noticed the ladder there was all covered in seaweed, so it was very slippery. So they couldn't have Katie Manning do it. Yeah. So they had one of the stunt men dress up as Katie Manning, but they could do that one bit as when climbing up the rig. And also, I didn't realize this until the documentary brought it out. One of the submarine crewmen was the commander, is actually played by Donald Sumter, who was in
of course,
Doctor Who before with The Wheel in Space, and has gone on to be in one story of the Sarah Jane Adventures, as well as being Rassilon in the infamous Hellbent.
Indeed, yeah, of course he was, yeah.
And I didn't realize until rewatching this documentary, and I've always been a fan of the actor, even though I thought his Rassilon was a little bit unremarkable. I still think he was a good actor, and I've always been a fan of him in many other films and TVs that he's done. So seeing him pop up in there, it was a nice little surprise as well. So yeah, it was definitely a solid documentary about the making of this story. And although I do have a feeling that when we do get to the inevitable season 9 Blu-ray box set, I'm pretty sure they'll deliver more special features, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, well, it seems like an obvious choice for a story to do a big on-location feature with, given the amount of locations they had, there that are available to go to and all of that. I feel like they'd be missing the trick almost if they didn't do something around the locations of that, whether we get a feature similar to what we're going to be getting in season 22, the location, sort of visit some locations from different stories of the season, or the direct route or something like that. I'm sure they'll go down that route. But Charlie, what did you enjoy the documentary? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed the documentary. I feel for me it was somewhat of an anomaly because mostly I enjoy watching the making ofs for the more troubled productions. Like they're more interesting and informative, explaining why all this went wrong, like Nightmare of Eden, Time in the Rani, that sort of stuff. I find that more interesting. But this was one of the few where the production was still very successful and it ended turning out pretty well. But there were still quite a few fun anecdotes. Like they were talking about obviously lots of the naval base stuff, considering that's a very unique part of the story and it's quite obvious to talk about that. And they were saying how whenever they needed some people to go and march for them, then everyone would just be really quick to volunteer, which just showed their enthusiasm as well. And there was one scene where I believe they told someone, I think it was John Pertwee, not to use the cannon. No, it was Captain Hart, sorry. And he went to the cannon anyway. And then they were literally just basically improvising. And he managed to work, a line about how do I use this into the actual script.
Yes, and I remember that bit. Yeah.
It's hard to explain, but it was just a really interesting anecdote as well. And obviously what you were talking about, the Sea Devils, and how the costume designer literally just took a random piece of netting from the set, ripped a hole in it and just put it on a Sea Devil costume in about 10, 20 seconds. I think that was it's just a really fun, interesting documentary with enough fun little anecdotes and things to say to justify it having a documentary, when I feel lots of them, sadly, from this era were they were relatively smooth productions, so there's not really much to talk about for lots of them. But this was quite an interesting one. So yeah, it was really enjoyable watch.
Yeah, and I think it's always good and always helpful when you have quite interesting interviewees. Like I always find Michael E. Bryan in particular is always a very interesting person to. He just always has some good stories to tell. I feel like, and just quite an interesting person to listen to. So when you've got people like that involved, it can always, I think, just elevate those sort of documentaries. So yeah, no, it's always nice to have a good making of documentary, especially with a story like this. And yeah, maybe we'll get something more of it in the future. Unfortunately, there's not really that much else on the original DVD release. I'm hoping they'll enhance that. I'm sure we'll get behind the sofa, but yeah, apart from the audio commentary and the info text, you've got obviously the soundtrack isolated like we always get. I think the only other thing of real interest is like an 8mm like film reel that was sort of shot on the set. I think it's the scene where the Sea Devils are getting like blown up by the mines that are sort of on the stones. I think it's that scene. It's just really interesting to see a sort of different angle of everything that's going on in that moment. Really, sort of in the scene. I think that's it's a little extra little thing. We often get those sort of little archive pieces of footage and stuff, which are always a sort of fun addition to it as well. Well, I think that's about all there is to say about the Sea Devils and the DVD, given there's just not a lot else on there. We certainly can hope there'll be a more expansive release in the future when I'm sure season 9 gets the collection treatment. But yeah, for us all, it's a great story, and certainly the better of the classic Who's Sea Devil stories, shall we say, as I'm sure we're not going to have quite such positive thoughts on Warriors of the Deep next week, but that's still something to look forward to. So yeah, now we bring it on, seeing as from our point of view, yesterday the Legend of the Sea Devils trailer came out. Our first more clear hint at what this story is going to look like, some sort of insight into it. So Bill, what was your initial take on the trailer yesterday?
So I didn't see it for quite a while. I think I only caught it like a good few hours after everyone else, it seemed, had seen it. But yeah, when I was finally able to get round to watching it, it kind of, as I was saying kind of earlier, it gave me this sense of fun, like swashbuckling kind of fun, which I think we'd kind of already got that feeling with like already with some of the stuff that had been revealed in SFX magazine and Doctor Who magazine, where we found out about like Dan's outfit for the episode and stuff like that. So yeah, but yeah, I'm really like happy that that's the direction that this episode is going in, because I think like how Eve of the Daleks was kind of like a detox after Flux and everything, I feel like we kind of need hopefully a slightly, I wouldn't say like really a story that hasn't got any kind of edge or seriousness to it, but a story that's a slightly lighter in tone in some places, and one which is just fun to watch. I think we kind of do need that. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to when it gets released. It's hard to believe it's only 2 weeks away now. I'm a bit annoyed that they waited this long to give us an actual proper trailer for it, but I think it was worth the wait ultimately, because it was a really, really good trailer. And yeah, I just really, really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, I did think that their marketing strategy was a bit odd. They kind of just 24 hours before put out an emoji, and then an hour before were like, it's about to happen, and then release the trailer. Like, it didn't really build any hype or excitement. I mean, there was nothing groundbreaking in the trailer. There wasn't like a shock character we weren't expecting it or anything like that. So I guess maybe there wasn't the reason to hype it up quite as much, because there wasn't anything new to announce alongside it. But I don't know, it just felt like there wasn't that much hype around it. Like there was, but I didn't feel like it was, wow, this is so exciting. We're all really excited. Like we are genuinely excited for the episode, but I don't feel like the trailer suddenly, changed that massively. But that's just my perspective on it. I mean, Charlie, what did you think of the trailer?
Well, like you said before, Elliot, I wasn't too excited. Like I wasn't too hyped about the episode. Mostly because I've been rewatching The Whittaker Era recently, and I've just gotten to the start of Flux again, and I'm noticing its flaws a bit more. And it's not amazing, I don't think. Like I originally put it 6th in my New Who ranking, and now it's probably going to drop to 9th, 10th, 11th era sort of.
Okay.
But anyway, so I wasn't too hyped about it, because I've been, more excited for other things like, everything Marvel's doing and things like that. But after the trailer, it actually does look really good. I feel it looks very, CGI is very impressive. It's very visually striking. It looks like if you I don't think I believe you if you just said it was a trailer for a regular episode. You can tell that it is a sort of special. It looks, to a higher standard, I feel.
Yeah.
And I feel I'm especially excited now for just the idea that this is going to be the last normal or somewhat normal episode of Doctor Who we're going to get in quite a long time, probably until like 2024 or so.
True, yeah.
Because, we're probably not going to get a series in 2023 because that'll just be whatever RTD's doing for the 60th. So
yeah.
I feel I'll just be looking forward to, like you said, Bill, an episode that's somewhat lighter in tone and just a bit of fun before we get on to the more serious side of, the the centenary special, which I can imagine we'll probably get some sort of tease for. I'd like to think.
Yes, I'm pretty sure Matt Strevens said at the Comic-Con a couple of months ago that there would be a next time trailer for the centenary special, because they shot it like 9 months ago, so I'm sure there's something they can show us.
They finished filming a while ago, so even if it is literally just a sort of tiny clip of the Master saying Sacha Dhawan will return, that'll be enough, to be honest. Or maybe just a title, something,
Yeah, I certainly think we'll get the title. That's a good point, because that's something I hadn't thought about really. But yeah, we might well get a title for the last episode of Jodie Whittaker's career, so that's quite exciting. Now, Ryan, I have to ask you about something quite specific about this trailer. The creature that we see sort of underneath the water that seems to be going towards the ship during it, and then I think there's a shot of its face a bit later on. Now, I have a theory, and a few people have had a theory about it being a certain returning creature from Warriors of the Deep. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that and whether you think that might be the case?
Oh man, if they somehow bring back the Merker but make it actually cool, and
I mean, the CGI looked good. The CGI looked good.
And make it more effective and useful rather than just looking like a ridiculous, some ridiculous thing that looked something out of Rent a Panto, so like a Panto horse.
Yeah.
Again, Warriors of the Deep coming soon, folks. Don't you worry.
Don't miss next week. Don't miss next week.
But I will say, obviously with this episode, I was already going to be a little bit like, okay, I might enjoy it. I mean, the fact that it's like a swashbuckling episode, it's which is the first time we've had something like this since 2011 with Curse of the Black Spot, I think. I think that was the last time we had sort of
I believe so.
type-esque story. So I have a feeling it's definitely going to be definitely enjoyable. I think it might be I have a feeling it might be my favourite of the three specials. I just have the feeling it might be. But I will say, I think it might be enjoyable, but if they somehow bring back the Merker, but actually make it really good, then already I think it could end up being the best of the Jodie Whittaker episode. If they somehow take that awful design that rivals a certain other monster from Creature from the Pit as the worst monster ever seen in Doctor Who history. If they somehow take that and make it cool, then it just goes to show that anything is possible, that anything can happen.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, Chris Chibnall seems to have an affinity for 1980s Doctor Who. I think it's fair to say, he brought back the tissue compression eliminator with the Master and the little contact thing between Time Lords and lots of, Time Lord mythology and stuff. So it kind of wouldn't surprise me if he went down that route of bringing back the Merker. I mean, maybe he'll do it justice. I mean,
was the monster that killed off classic Doctor Who because, again, a little bit of slight tease for next week. This was the monster that Michael Grade used as an example of why he hated Doctor Who so much and why he wanted it cancelled. So already the Merker has proven to be the monster that has killed off Doctor Who. It wasn't the Daleks or the Cybermen, it was this monster that looks like something out of a run-down pantomime theatre.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at least the future of Doctor Who is secure, so we don't have to worry about the Merker killing Doctor Who a second time.
That. But fingers crossed.
Yes.
I mean, as long as the CGI is good, if it ends up being bad, then we could end up getting criticisms for the Merca, but on a different level.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Charlie, we obviously saw a lot more of the actual Sea Devils in this trailer, doing a bit of action, sword fighting Sea Devils and stuff, which looks really tremendously exciting. Seeing them a bit more in action, what do you think of the sort of visual look of the Sea Devils in the trailer?
They look really good, to be honest. I don't really have any complaints about them. I feel like love or hate Chibnall Zero, especially the most recent, like Flux. He's very good at bringing back, returning villains from the classic series or the new series. Like we had Time Warrior-esque Sontarans. Obviously, Weeping Angels, I think we can all agree were handled pretty well. Obviously, the Lone Cyberman, the Executioner Dalek, he's handled returning villains very well, I think. And I don't think this is an exception. I feel it looks pretty much like the previous Sea Devils, but obviously CGI'd a bit with a bit more polished costumes. And I didn't realize this before, but it's Craig Ells, who was obviously Carvanista, who's playing, I think it's Marcissus, the leader of the Sea Devils in this. I was reading about I was reading the DWM interview about it, about the costumes and things, and how completely unique each one's design is. I feel it's really interesting to read about. But yeah, especially I feel even the way they move, I was worrying slightly before that it would be a bit slightly jarring, maybe the overuse of CGI, but I feel they've really pulled it off as well, and it'll be really good to see some Sea Devil sword fighting, again reminiscent of the original Sea Devil story.
Of course,
I am hoping we get a few references to Sea Devils and maybe even Warriors of the Deep, like we were saying about the Merca. So yeah, I do think they look just as good as in the teaser trailer, in which we only really saw just one sort of standing there.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think they certainly, carried off a very, look very impressive in the trailer itself as well. And Bill, was there anything else that really stood out to you in that trailer? Obviously, we've got this sort of setting. I think it's in the 1900s, these sort of Chinese pirates idea. I feel like it's another example of Chris Chibnall kind of shining a light on, I think, historical figures that we don't really know that much about, with this sort of Madam Ching. Was it Ching or something like that? Who's like a famous Ching, Chinese pirate or something, I think, or involved in that. I don't know. Was there anything else like that you really took of interest in the trailer?
The historical stuff looks interesting. Like you say, it's another thing that Chibnall can be quite good at, is lesser known historical characters. So yeah, that will be really interesting to see how that's done. I wouldn't say I think I'm probably looking forward to the centenary and the 60th probably slightly more than this episode in some ways, but not to say that I think this is going to be a bad episode. I think it's still going to be pretty good, hopefully. But I think it is like, I think Charlie was saying earlier, it is going to be like the last bit of fun before, everything everything starts going down with the centenary and 60th specials. I'm looking forward to it, but it's kind of one which, again, it's something which it seems good and it looks good and everything, but I suppose in some ways it's not kind of capturing my interest in quite the same way as the centenary or the 60th might do, or anything else that's coming out at the minute in general. I think again, it's partly because of the marketing, really. I think they should really have taken advantage of, because they've had many opportunities, I think, back during March to do at least something, even if it wasn't a full trailer. They could have at least given us another teaser or something. I'm glad we got the stuff in the magazines a week or so ago, but even then, they could have done that a bit earlier on. But yeah, I think it will still be a lot of fun anyway, even if it may not be. I don't think the stakes will be that high, as opposed to the centenary special, which obviously, with that being the final episode of this current era of Doctor Who, I think the stakes of that are going to be incredibly high, and we're really going to have to see if Chris Chibnall can pull it off and give us a satisfying conclusion to his era.
Yeah.
But yeah, with this one, there's not many like big stakes, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. You know, it can just be a fun kind of romp in a way. It can just be, you know, a bit of fun that will kind of keep us going until the centenary special.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've kind of learned over the years with Doctor Who to try and almost just enjoy the sort of slightly less big and epic episodes. I've definitely been guilty in the past, and you know, especially with series of Doctor Who, like waiting for the big finale to come up, you know, the big shock reveal or the big monster return or whatever. Whereas actually, I think, you know, especially at this time where we have so few episodes of Doctor Who to look forward to, we've obviously got 2 more this year, maybe 2 or 3, depending on how many RTD does for the 60th in 2023. And realistically, it's probably about 2 years from now before we get another series of Doctor Who. So I've sort of just, kind of learned and kind of changed my perspective of like just enjoying it for what it is, that it's going to be a really fun episode of Doctor Who featuring a classic iconic monster. They didn't have many stories, is still, I think, really iconic, and just kind of getting the real fun aspect out of that before then, obviously, turning all our attentions to the centenary and whatever Chris has got cooked up for that, because, you know, he said that it could have been the last episode of Doctor Who. He didn't know who was coming in to take it over when he wrote it. So I'm looking forward to whatever little hint we get of it in a trailer or something at the end of Legend of the Sea Devils. But I also just want to really wholly enjoy that as a story as well. I think that's going to be really, really important. But
I will say more briefly, whatever my feelings of the story could be, one thing's for certain: it's definitely going to be more enjoyable and less frustrating than Flux. I will say that. Because in my thoughts on Flux, this is going to be a gentle light breeze. Absolutely.
Yeah, we might get through this one just about unscathed. But Charlie, has the trailer raised your excitement for this episode, or are you just kind of generally looking forward to it?
It's definitely raised my excitement for it. I was never really that hyped for it before. I do feel it's going to be a very good episode. Probably my second or third favorite of Jodie's era, probably after Village of the Angels, and I'm going to say KerVAM. I actually really enjoyed that one.
Okay.
On a rewatch. But yeah, I feel it's going to be definitely one of the better ones of the Jodie Whittaker era. The only slight reservation I'm having about it is the way they handle Phasmin, as it's called.
Yes, I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
That's it could work, but if it does, it's a bit late, really, I feel.
Yeah, I'm struggling to read into, you know, they've made a few sort of comments where they're like, this is a fun adventure. It's going to be addressed, but it's not a big part of the episode. And I'm like, what does that actually mean? Does that mean we're just going to push it to the side to the last 5 minutes? Or is it actually going to be interweaved into the story? Like, I feel, you know, obviously we've talked before about, you know, introducing it too late. And, you know, I think that is a problem. But at least if they're going to do it, then I want them to kind of go all in on it and not pretend that it's not there for an episode, especially when we've only got 2 left. So yeah, I'm slightly unsure how they're gonna deal with that, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I will say very quickly, if it's going to be another thing where they don't really address it that much, it's just sort of skimmed over, and they try to address it more in the last episode where it's definitely too little too late, then it's just going to reflect my initial feelings going into the centenary special, which is that I might end up liking it, but I'm at best, but I probably won't love it because of the fact that a lot of these stuff with the Chibnall just hasn't really been developed enough, and especially given my thoughts on it, mixed feelings on it so far, it's not going to be as satisfying, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it's just good. I'm just hoping they can at least try and pull it off the best they can. If not, then it might end up confirming that the Chibnall has been kind of a mixed bag, pretty much kind of like the 80s Who in general.
Well, yeah, it feels like Chris Chibnall, you know, he back in the 80s he was slating 1980s Doctor Who, and now he's making 1980s Doctor Who. But you know, there we go. Well, that pretty much brings us towards the end. Of course, next week we're going to discuss Warriors of the Deep, as we've made very clear, and also we'll bring a preview of Legend of the Sea Devils. But Bill's not going to be able to join us next week, so I just wanted to give you a little opportunity, Bill, just to kind of give you if you've got any other thoughts. I know we talked about it a bit already, but if there's anything else you wanted to kind of share about any hopes or expectations or excitement about this story, just as you won't be able to make it next week.
Yeah, I basically just hope that it will be as fun as it looks, and the Phasmin stuff, as you guys were saying, I hope it does get addressed a bit more than they're kind of seeming to lead on at the minute, because I think it's something which, I've got no problems with. I mean, as long as they do it right, I really don't mind it at all. But it does worry me that with, like you say, only 2 episodes to go, if they're not going to focus it on it that much in one of those 2 episodes, then, it maybe they could have done something more of it, perhaps in Doctor Who Flux. Might have been a bit difficult with how much stuff was going on, but maybe could have done perhaps a bit more of that. But yeah, I just hope that Legends of the Sea Devils is another kind of it's kind of what Eve of the Daleks was, as I was saying earlier, kind of like a detox to just give us a bit of fun, something to keep us going until the centenary. And I just hope that it's as good as it looks.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's probably going to be the last sort of more normal episode of Doctor Who for 2 years, until probably this time in 2024, given all the anniversary and centenary celebrations and whatever. So I think we can certainly try and enjoy it for that as well. But thank you, Bill, for that. And as I say, we'll be back next week to discuss Warriors of the Deep, hopefully the special features as well. I know there's an interesting documentary about that, and I'm sure, Ryan, you cannot wait to give Warriors of the Deep another watch this week. It's going to be an experience.
What is clearly the best of the Sea Devils.
Yeah, the best of Doctor Who, obviously.
Yeah, pray for me, people. Pray for me.
Indeed. So I think you guys might have some idea of where our opinions will be heading that way. But I'm going in with an open mind. Maybe Ryan isn't so much, but I am. Charlie, are you going to go and try and go with an open mind to Warriors of the Deep?
I'll give it my best shot, I guess.
I think we'll start by looking for positives, and then that might be about 1 minute of the podcast, and then there'll be an hour of the negatives. But as I say,
it's going to be very hard for me. Very hard.
Yeah, it's going to be a challenge. But anyway, we're going to chat about that and lots of fun with Legends of the Sea Devils as well. If there's any more, preview content between now and then as well, we'll obviously be able to address that and give our final thoughts before the episode airs on the 17th of April. But that's about it from this edition of KerVAM. My thanks to Ryan, Charlie, and Bill. Do forget, of course, to follow us we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on my channel, EMS Productions, so you can kind of keep across all the new pods. I'm hoping to kind of bring them a little bit more regularly. We'll be celebrating our anniversary of the podcast at the end of April as well, so there's lots more to look forward to in terms of content here at KerVAM. But that's about it for this edition, and we'll see you all again very, very soon.